The wind howled through the gaps in the weathered wood. A mournful sound that matched the emptiness in Eleanor May Hutchinson's chest. She pulled the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little against the Wyoming cold that seeped through every crack of the cabin. The fire in the hearth had died to embers hours ago, and she hadn't the strength to rekindle it. Not yet. 3 days. It had been 3 days since they'd lowered Samuel into the frozen ground behind the chapel in town. 3 days since she'd become a widow at 24, with nothing to show for 5 years of marriage but bruises that were finally fading and a ramshackle cabin at the edge of the pines. Eleanor ran her fingers along the rough table surface, remembering how Samuel would slam his fist against it when the whiskey ran low or when she burned the cornbread. The townspeople had whispered their condolences at the funeral, but she'd seen the look in their eyes. Some pitied her. Others suspected her. A hunting accident. They'd agreed to call it, though everyone knew Samuel Hutchinson was too experienced a trapper to accidentally shoot himself while climbing over a fallen log. The larder was nearly empty. 2 withered potatoes, a handful of dried beans, and cornmeal that would last perhaps another week if she was careful. Samuel had traded most of their winter stores for liquor at Murphy's General Store just 2 weeks before his death. Now the snow was coming, and she was alone. Eleanor forced herself to stand, her joints protesting from the cold. The woodpile needed attention before the storm hit. Already, she could see the dark clouds gathering over the mountains, heavy with the promise of the season's first real blizzard. She wrapped herself in Samuel's old coat. It still smelled of tobacco and pine sap, and stepped outside. The axe felt heavier than usual in her hands. Each swing sent vibrations up her arms, but she welcomed the physical pain. It was something real, something other than the hollow ache that had taken residence in her chest. Splinters of pine flew with each strike, the sharp crack of splitting wood echoing across the silent landscape. You won't last the winter. Eleanor May? Mrs. Crawford's words from the funeral still rang in her ears. The banker's wife had meant it as concern, perhaps, but Eleanor heard the underlying message clear enough. A young widow with no family, no means, and a cloud of suspicion hanging over her husband's death. She was expected to sell the land, move back east, or marry the first man who'd have her. But this patch of hard ground, this crooked cabin with its leaking roof and drafty walls, was the only thing that belonged to her. Samuel had been many things, most of them cruel, but his death had given her the one thing he never had in life: freedom. The sound of hooves on frozen earth made her pause mid-swing. Eleanor squinted through the afternoon gloom, her hand tightening on the axe handle. Visitors were rare this far from town, and those who did come usually brought trouble. A lone rider emerged from the tree line, moving slow and deliberate, even from a distance. Eleanor could see he was a big man, broad-shouldered and sitting easy in the saddle despite what looked like days of hard travel. His horse's breath clouded in the cold air, and both man and beast looked bone-weary. Eleanor didn't lower the axe. The stranger stopped a respectful distance from the cabin, his hands visible on the saddle horn. Now she could see him clearer. A thick beard covered most of his face, but couldn't hide the gaunt hollows of his cheeks. His coat was military issue, faded and patched, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was rough as gravel. "Ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat. "Name's Luke Callahan. I don't mean to trouble you, but I wonder if you might spare some water for my horse. We've been riding hard, and there's a storm coming." Eleanor studied him, noting the way he kept his hands still, the careful distance he maintained. A drifter, by the look of him. Maybe a veteran, judging by the coat and the way he held himself. Definitely armed. She could see the butt of a revolver at his hip. "Well's around back," she said finally. "Help yourself." He nodded, started to turn his horse, then paused. "I can pay. Not much, but—" He gestured toward the darkening sky. "That storm's going to be a bad one. If you got a barn or shed where I might shelter for the night, I'd be obliged. I can work for it. Looks like you could use more wood split." Eleanor almost said no. Should have said no. A woman alone didn't invite strange men to stay, not if she valued her safety or what was left of her reputation. But something in his voice, in the weary set of his shoulders, made her hesitate, and the practical part of her mind, the part that had learned to survive Samuel's tempers and empty promises, whispered that she did need the wood split. The storm was coming, and she couldn't manage alone. "There's a lean-to attached to the barn," she heard herself saying. "It's not much, but it's dry. You can bed down there." Relief flickered across his weathered features. "Much obliged. Ma'am, I'll see to my horse and get to that woodpile directly." Eleanor watched him lead his horse around the cabin, noting the slight limp in his gait, the way he favored his left side. When he was out of sight, she finally lowered the axe, her hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, exactly, but from something else. It had been 3 days since Samuel died, 3 days since she'd spoken to another soul, and the simple exchange left her feeling oddly shaken. She retreated inside, busying herself with the meager supplies. If he was working, she supposed she ought to offer him something. The last of the coffee, perhaps, and cornbread if she could manage it. Through the small window, she could see him at the woodpile, working with steady, methodical strikes. He'd removed his coat despite the cold, and she could see the powerful movement of his shoulders, the efficiency of someone who'd done hard labor before. As the afternoon wore on and the woodpile grew, Eleanor found herself stealing glances through the window. He worked without pause, without complaint, stacking the split logs neat as you please. When he finally stopped, the pile was twice what she'd managed in 3 days. She met him at the door with a cup of black coffee and a small portion of cornbread. His eyes, when he looked up at her, were gray as the winter sky, old beyond their years. "Thank you kindly," he said, accepting the offerings with hands that shook slightly. Hunger, she recognized. She'd seen that tremor before. They stood there awkwardly, him on the porch, her in the doorway. Up close, she could see the scar that ran along his neck, disappearing beneath his collar, could see the deep lines carved around his eyes, the kind that came from squinting against sun and sand and things a man didn't want to remember. "I'll bring blankets out to the lean-to," she said. "I've slept in worse places." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "I should tell you, ma'am, I know what folks in town are saying. About you, about your husband. Heard it at Murphy's when I stopped for supplies." Eleanor stiffened. "And what's that to you?" "Nothing. Just thought you should know I'm not one for gossip. Your business is your own." He drained the coffee, handed back the cup. "I'll be gone come morning, soon as the storm passes." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He touched his hat again and headed for the barn, that slight limp more pronounced now that the work was done. Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, heart hammering for reasons she couldn't name. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, soft and silent as secrets. By nightfall, the storm would be upon them in earnest, trapping them both. The widow suspected of murder and the drifter with scars he didn't explain. But for now, Eleanor built up the fire with wood he'd split, allowing herself to feel warm for the first time in days. Through the thin walls, she could hear him settling the horse, the low murmur of his voice as he talked to the animal. It was a sound she'd forgotten, the simple comfort of another human presence, even a stranger's. Samuel had filled the cabin with noise, with anger and demands and the crash of breaking things. But this quiet presence, this careful distance, felt different. As darkness fell and the wind began to keen in earnest, Eleanor found herself wondering about the man in her barn. What had driven him to the territories? What ghosts followed him through the cold? And why, when she had every reason to be afraid? Did she feel safer than she had in years? The storm was coming, but for the first time since Samuel's death, Eleanor May Hutchinson didn't feel entirely alone. The storm raged for 3 days, 3 days of white fury that turned the world into a howling void, trapping them in their separate shelters like insects in amber. Eleanor kept the fire burning, rationing the wood he'd split, while somewhere in the barn, Luke Callahan waited out the blizzard with his horse. On the second day, when the wind died down enough to venture outside, Eleanor wrapped herself in layers and fought her way to the barn with a pot of hot beans and coffee. She found him repairing a broken stall door, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "You don't need to do that," she said, setting the food on a barrel. He straightened slowly, like a man whose bones had forgotten comfort. "Helps pass the time. Besides, this old barn's got good bones. Shame to let it fall apart." She watched him work while he ate, noting the economical movements, the way he made every motion count. Samuel had been all rage and wasted energy, but this man moved like someone who'd learned to conserve his strength for when it mattered. "You know your way around a barn," she observed. "Grew up on a farm in Ohio, before the war." He said it simple, like stating the weather, but she heard the weight in those last 3 words. Which side? Union, 14th Infantry. He took another spoonful of beans, chewing slowly. "Long time ago now." Eleanor knew better than to push. Men who'd been through the war carried their stories like shrapnel, buried deep and painful to dig out. Instead, she studied the repairs he'd made. Straight, careful work that would hold for years. "I can't pay you for all this." He shrugged. "Didn't ask you to." That afternoon, as the storm picked up again, she found herself back in the barn with more coffee and the last of her dried apple pie. He was sitting on a hay bale, carefully mending a bridle with hands that seemed too large for such delicate work. "My wife liked apple pie," he said suddenly, then seemed surprised he'd spoken. Eleanor settled on a crate across from him. "Where is she now?" "Cemetery outside Youngstown. Fever took her while I was in Georgia." His fingers never paused in their work. "Got the letter same day we marched on Atlanta. I'm sorry. Long time ago," he repeated, but his voice was gentler this time. They sat in companionable silence, the storm making the barn walls creak. Eleanor found herself studying his face in the dim light filtering through the cracks. Without the shadow of his hat, she could see he wasn't as old as she'd first thought. Maybe 35, with premature gray threading through dark hair and beard. The kind of aging that came from seeing too much too young. "How long were you married?" he asked, surprising her. 5 years. "Happy ones?" Eleanor almost laughed. "Almost." "No." He nodded like that was answer enough. "My Sarah used to say that marriage was like farming. Some years you get good soil and rain, some years you get drought and stones, but you keep working the land either way." "What if the land's poison?" The words came out bitter. "What if nothing good can grow there?" Luke looked at her then, those gray eyes steady and knowing. "Then maybe it's time to find new land." The third night of the storm. Eleanor woke to the sound of screaming. Not the wind, she'd grown used to that. This was human, raw and terrible. She grabbed the shotgun Samuel had kept by the door and ventured onto the porch. The sound came again from the barn. Without thinking, she plunged into the snow, fighting through drifts that reached her knees. The barn door was barred from inside. She pounded on it. "Luke! Luke! Open the door!" A crash from within. Then silence. Eleanor hammered harder, fear making her reckless. Finally, she heard the bar sliding back. The door opened to reveal Luke, wild-eyed and shaking, a knife clutched in his hand. "It's me," she said quickly. "It's Eleanor. You're in Wyoming. You're safe." He stared at her like he was seeing through her to some other place, some other time. Slowly, recognition dawned. The knife clattered to the floor. Christ, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "Nightmares?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. He nodded, sinking onto a hay bale. His hands were shaking badly now. Eleanor set the shotgun aside and moved closer, careful not to startle him. "Sometimes I'm back there," he said hoarsely. "Spotsylvania, the bloody angle. 20 hours of fighting in the rain, hand to hand. You couldn't tell friend from foe. Just bodies everywhere, mud and blood and—" He stopped, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. Eleanor had heard stories. Of course. Everyone had, but hearing it from someone who'd lived it, seeing the way it still lived in him, was different. Without thinking, she sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. He tensed, then slowly relaxed. How often? Most nights. Sometimes I go weeks without, then something, a sound, a smell, and I'm back there. She thought of her own nights, startling awake at every creak, expecting Samuel's heavy tread, his slurred curses, different battles. Maybe, but the scars were the same. I know something about nightmares, she said quietly. He looked at her sideways. That why you came running out here with a shotgun? Most folks would have stayed inside, locked their doors. Eleanor shrugged. Most folks haven't lived with real monsters. They sat in silence while his breathing steadied. Outside, the storm was finally dying, the wind dropping to a whisper. Dawn wasn't far off. I should go, Luke said eventually. Storm's passing. I've troubled you enough. Roads will be impassable for days. Snow's too deep. I've traveled through worse. With a lame horse, because that's what you'll have if you push him through those drifts. Eleanor stood, brushing hay from her skirts. You'll stay until the road's clear. That's sense, not charity. He studied her face in the lantern light. Why are you being kind to me? The question caught her off guard. She thought of the easy answer. Christian charity, simple decency, but something about the darkness, about the shared weight of nightmares, demanded truth. Because you're the first person in years who's looked at me and seen a person. Not a possession, not a victim, not a suspect, just a person. She gathered up the shotgun. Breakfast in an hour. I'll need more wood split if we're going to last until the thaw. She left him there, making her way back through the breaking dawn. The storm had transformed the landscape into something alien and beautiful, all sharp edges softened by snow. In the growing light, she could see the damaged fence posts snapped like matchsticks, the chicken coop half collapsed. Work that would need doing, but for the first time in memory, the thought didn't fill her with despair. There would be someone to help, someone who worked steady and sure, who didn't rage at imperfection or blame her for the weather. It was a small thing. Maybe, but it felt like everything. Inside, she built up the fire and mixed the last of her flour into biscuit dough. Through the window, she watched Luke emerge from the barn, moving slow but purposeful toward the wood pile. He'd put himself back together, locked away whatever demons the night had freed. She recognized the process. She'd done it herself every morning of her marriage. When he knocked at the door an hour later, arms full of split wood, she had coffee hot and biscuits browning in the Dutch oven. He stomped snow from his boots, careful not to track mud across her floor. Smells like heaven, he said. It's just biscuits. Ma'am, after 3 days of cold beans, those biscuits might as well be manna. She almost smiled at that. Almost. They ate in companionable silence, the kitchen warming as the sun climbed higher. Outside, the world glittered with painful brightness. Tell me about Ohio, Eleanor said suddenly. About your farm, before. So he did. Talked about green summers and corn higher than a man's head. About a father who knew every inch of soil. A mother who could make anything grow. About Sarah, met at a church social, married in the same church 2 years later. About plans for children and expanded acreage, and a future that never came. In return, Eleanor found herself talking about things she'd never said aloud. About her father's drinking. About being married off at 19 to settle a debt. About 5 years of walking on eggshells, of bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, of a kind of loneliness that ate at you from the inside. That why folks suspect you? Luke asked carefully. About his death? Eleanor stared into her coffee. He was drunk, took the rifle out even though I begged him not to, said he'd seen elk sign. She paused. I didn't kill him, but I didn't mourn him either. I suppose that's sin enough for most people. Surviving isn't a sin. Tell that to the good Christians in town. I'm telling it to you. She looked up then, meeting his steady gaze. There was no judgment there, no pity, just understanding from someone who knew about surviving, about carrying guilt for being the one who lived. The sun was fully up now, turning the snow to diamonds. Soon the roads would clear. He would leave. She would go back to scraping by alone, to cold nights and colder stares from townspeople. But for now, for this morning, she wasn't alone. And that, Eleanor thought as she poured more coffee, was enough. The roads cleared on the 5th day. Eleanor watched from the porch as Luke saddled his horse, every movement deliberate and final. He'd fixed the chicken coop yesterday, patched the holes in the barn roof the day before. The place looked better than it had in years, but all she could see were the coming, empty days. "I left some venison in the smokehouse," he said, checking the cinch one more time. "Shot a deer yesterday morning. Should last you a few weeks if you're careful." She nodded, not trusting her voice. It was foolish, this hollow feeling in her chest. He was a drifter, a stranger who'd sheltered from a storm. Nothing more. "Eleanor." He turned to face her, hat in his hands. "I wanted to thank you. For the kindness. He paused, searching for words. "For treating me like a man instead of a ghost. Where will you go?" "South, maybe. Colorado. There's work in the silver mines." He studied the mountains. "Somewhere the snow doesn't pile so high." She wanted to ask him to stay. The words burned in her throat like whiskey. But what could she offer? A drafty cabin and the contempt of townspeople? A woman whose reputation was already in tatters? He deserved better than that. "Safe travels, then," she managed. He mounted up, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. For a moment, she thought that would be it. He'd ride away and she'd never see him again. But he paused at the edge of the yard, looking back. "That offer for new land," he said. "Sometimes a person's got to make it for themselves." Then he was gone, disappearing into the tree line like he'd never been there at all. Eleanor stood on the porch until she couldn't feel her feet, watching the empty trail. Finally, she went inside and built up the fire, trying not to notice how much quieter everything seemed. She lasted 2 hours before the silence drove her outside. There was work to do. There was always work to do. She attacked the woodpile with vicious energy, splitting logs until her hands were raw. But every stroke of the axe reminded her of watching him work, steady and sure. That evening, she was heating leftover venison stew when she heard horses, multiple horses, moving fast. Her stomach clenched as she recognized the lead rider, Sheriff Watson, his deputy beside him, and 2 men she didn't know, rough-looking men with tied-down guns and bounty hunter written all over them. Eleanor met them at the door, shotgun visible but not raised. "Mrs. Hutchinson." The sheriff touched his hat, but his eyes were cold. "We're looking for a man, drifter. Goes by Luke Callahan. Big fellow, dark hair, probably wearing an old army coat." "Why?" She kept her voice level. "He's wanted for murder down in Kansas. Killed a man in a saloon fight 2 years back." Watson leaned forward in his saddle. "Innkeeper in town says he saw someone matching that description heading this way before the storm. You see anyone like that?" Eleanor's mind raced. Murder. But she'd seen his hands, gentle with the broken bridle, heard his voice in the darkness, broken by memories of a war that never ended. Whatever had happened in Kansas, she'd bet her life it wasn't as simple as the sheriff made it sound. "Haven't seen anyone," she said. "Been snowed in like everyone else." One of the bounty hunters dismounted without asking, walking toward the barn. "Mind if we look around?" "Yes, I do mind." Eleanor raised the shotgun slightly. "Woman alone out here. I don't take kindly to strangers poking through my property." "Now, Mrs. Hutchinson," Watson began, but she cut him off. "You got a warrant, Sheriff? Or are you just taking the word of bounty hunters looking for a payday?" The man who dismounted turned back, hand moving toward his gun. "Listen here, woman." "That's enough." Watson's voice was sharp. "Get back on your horse. Morrison." The bounty hunter glared but complied. Watson studied Eleanor for a long moment. "That firewood looks fresh split," he observed. I'm a widow. Sheriff, not an invalid. Awful lot of wood for one woman. Awful long winter ahead. They stared at each other. Finally, Watson sighed. If you see this Callahan fellow, you send word to town. He's dangerous. All men are dangerous. Sheriff, just some hide it better than others. After they left, Eleanor barred the door and sank onto a chair. Shaking, Luke was in trouble. Real trouble. The kind that ended with a rope or a bullet. She thought of him riding south, unaware that death was following. She lasted until midnight before saddling Samuel's old mare. The moon was bright enough to follow the trail, though she'd never ridden it in the dark. Town was 6 hours in good weather. She could make it by dawn if she pushed hard. The saloon was just opening when she arrived, the owner sweeping last night's sawdust out the door. Murphy's general store wouldn't open for hours, but Eleanor knew where Murphy lived. She pounded on his door until his wife answered, hair in curling rags and murder in her eyes. Land sakes! Eleanor Hutchinson! What are you— I need to see your husband. Now! Murphy appeared, suspenders hanging loose. Mrs. Hutchinson, what's this about? Those men who were here, the bounty hunters. What did they say about Luke Callahan? Murphy's eyes narrowed. Why would you care about some drifter? Please. She hated the desperation in her voice but couldn't stop it. I need to know what happened in Kansas. Maybe it was the early hour. Or maybe Murphy had a shred of decency left. But he let her in. Over bitter coffee, he told her what he'd heard. Saloon in Dodge City. Callahan was playing cards when some fellow accused him of cheating. Pulled a knife. Callahan took it away from him. But in the struggle, Murphy shrugged. Man ended up with his own knife in his gut. Callahan lit out before the law arrived. Self-defense then. Maybe, but the dead man was the mayor's nephew. Had connections. They put a price on Callahan's head, $500, dead or alive. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Dead or alive meant the bounty hunters wouldn't bother with a trial. Where were they headed? South. Figured he'd make for Colorado. Maybe New Mexico. Murphy studied her shrewdly. He was here, wasn't he? At your place? Eleanor stood. Thank you for the coffee. Eleanor. Murphy's voice stopped her at the door. That man's trouble you don't need. You've got a chance to start fresh. Don't throw it away on some drifter with blood on his hands. But Eleanor was already gone, pushing the tired mare back up the mountain. The sun was high when she reached the cutoff to the southern trail. She could see the tracks, 5 horses, moving steady. They'd have caught up to Luke by now, unless he hadn't gone south at all. It was a hunch, nothing more, but something he'd said nagged at her. Somewhere the snow doesn't pile so high, but Luke Callahan was a man who'd survived Spotsylvania, who'd lost everything and kept moving. He wouldn't run from snow. She turned the mare east, toward the high country, toward the abandoned mining camps and forgotten trails. If she were running, if she wanted to disappear, that's where she'd go. 2 hours later, she found his tracks. He'd doubled back, crossed the creek to hide his trail, then headed up into the rocks. Smart. But the bounty hunters were smart too. They'd figure it out eventually. She pushed harder, the mare laboring in the thin air. The trail was treacherous, narrow switchbacks with deadly drops. One wrong step. She heard the shot before she saw them. Then another. Her heart hammered as she rounded the bend. Luke had made his stand in a cluster of rocks, natural cover with clear sight lines. One bounty hunter was down, clutching his shoulder. The others had taken cover below, unable to advance but keeping Luke pinned. Give it up, Callahan. Watson's voice carried clear in the mountain air. You're outnumbered. Eleanor left the mare tied and worked her way around, using skills learned from years of avoiding Samuel's rages. She could see Luke now, rifle steady, conserving ammunition. He was bleeding from a graze on his temple. She was behind the deputy when she pressed the shotgun to his spine. Drop it, she said quietly. He froze, then slowly set down his rifle. The others were focused on Luke. Hadn't noticed yet. Eleanor, Luke's voice, shocked. The distraction was enough. Morrison spun, saw her, went for his gun. Luke's rifle cracked. Morrison pitched backward. in the chaos that followed. Watson diving for cover, the wounded man screaming, Eleanor holding the deputy at gunpoint. Luke scrambled down from the rocks. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Saving your worthless hide," she snapped, adrenaline making her sharp. "Can you ride?" "Eleanor, you don't understand. I'm wanted for killing a man in self-defense." "I know." She gestured with the shotgun. "Sheriff, you're going to listen real careful. This man sheltered at my place during the storm, fixed my barn, chopped my wood, never laid a hand on me improper. Now you're hunting him like an animal for defending himself?" "The law says..." "The law says a lot of things. Said my husband had the right to beat me senseless whenever the mood struck. Don't see you enforcing that law when I showed up in town with black eyes." Watson had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Here's what's going to happen," Eleanor continued. "You're going to take these men and ride back to town. You're going to wire Kansas that Luke Callahan died in the mountains. Mining accident, maybe, or froze in a blizzard. Body unrecoverable." "I can't." "You can and you will, because if you don't, I'll ride to the territorial capital and tell them how Sheriff Watson takes bribes from bounty hunters, how he lets them terrorize widows, how he ignored 5 years of a man beating his wife near to death but jumps quick enough when there's blood money involved. You're bluffing. Try me." Eleanor's voice was steel. "I've got nothing left to lose. Sheriff, but you've got that nice house, that political career you're building. How's that going to look when a widow starts talking?" Long silence. Finally, Watson holstered his gun. "Get Morrison on his horse," he told the deputy. "We're leaving, but the bounty is $500. Your life worth that to you?" Watson looked old suddenly. "Callahan's dead. Died in an avalanche. We'll file the report when we get back." They left. Morrison slung over his saddle, the wounded man riding double with the deputy. Eleanor didn't lower the shotgun until they were out of sight. Then her knees gave out. Luke caught her before she hit the ground, strong arms pulling her against his chest. She was shaking now, reaction setting in. "Why?" he asked roughly. "Why would you risk everything?" "Because..." The words came hard. "Because you looked at me and saw something worth saving, even when I couldn't see it myself." She pulled back to look at him. "Was it self-defense in Kansas?" "Yes, but Eleanor, that won't matter if..." "Then that's all I need to know." He stared at her, this woman who'd faced down armed men for him, who'd thrown away what little reputation she had left. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "You remarkable creature," he murmured. "You can't go south now," she said, practical even as her skin burned where he touched her. "They'll be watching." "No." His gray eyes held hers. "I can't go south." The question hung between them, unspoken but clear. Eleanor thought of her empty cabin, her poisoned land that Murphy had mentioned. Thought of the nights since he'd left, how the silence had pressed against her like a living thing. "The barn roof still leaks in the northwest corner," she said. A smile ghosted across his face. "Does it now? And there's a whole section of fence down from the storm. Sounds like a lot of work for one person." "It is." She covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "Good thing I'm not one person anymore." They made their way back down the mountain together, leading both horses. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, painting the snow crimson and gold. It looked different somehow. Not empty anymore, but waiting. "Eleanor." Luke stopped her at the door. "This won't be easy. If anyone figures out I'm alive, then we'll face it together." She met his eyes steady. "I've spent 5 years in a different kind of war. Luke, at least this one. I've got someone fighting on my side." He kissed her then, gentle as his hands had been with the broken bridle, careful as his words in the dark. When they pulled apart, both breathing uneven, Eleanor felt something crack open inside her chest, not breaking, thawing. "Welcome home," she whispered. And for the first time in his wandering, Luke Callahan believed it might be true. Living in the same space yet separate was its own kind of torture. Luke had made the barn habitable, patching walls and building a proper bunk, but he took his meals with Eleanor. They worked side by side during the days, fixing fence, tending the animals she'd bought with money from selling Samuel's guns, preparing for spring planting. Their hands would brush passing tools. Their shoulders would touch as they lifted heavy beams. And always, that careful distance. The town thought Luke Callahan was dead, but they noticed Eleanor had help. When she went to Murphy's for supplies, conversations stopped. Women pulled their skirts aside. Men stared with knowing looks that made her skin crawl. "That's Jed Harper's horse in your barn," Murphy observed one day, counting out her change with deliberate slowness. "Thought he went missing months back. Found it wandering after the storm," Eleanor said evenly. "Figured I'd put it to use rather than let it starve." Murphy's eyes were shrewd. "Funny how that horse showed up right around the time Callahan had his accident in the mountains." Eleanor met his gaze. "Funny how a lot of things happen in these parts, like your scale being off by near a pound on that flour last month." Murphy flushed and handed over her goods without another word. But the scrutiny wore on them both. Luke stayed out of sight when anyone came near, melting into the forest like smoke. Eleanor handled all the town business, enduring the whispers and speculation with her chin high. At night, they sat by the fire, careful not to touch. The space between them charged like air before lightning. It was a Tuesday in late April when everything changed. Eleanor was washing clothes in the yard, Luke hauling water from the creek. When they heard horses approaching, Luke vanished into the barn as 3 riders appeared. Not townspeople, but rough men with the look of hired guns. Mrs. Hutchinson, the leader, a scarred man with pale eyes, touched his hat. "Name's Cooper. We're looking for someone might have passed this way. Man called Luke Callahan." Eleanor's hand stilled on the washboard. "Sheriff Watson said he died in the mountains. Avalanche." Cooper smiled, and it was like watching a snake uncoil. "That's what the good sheriff reported. But funny thing, we talked to a trapper who swears he saw Callahan's horse being led down from the high country by a woman. Trappers tell a lot of tales. Maybe, but the man who's paying us to find Callahan doesn't think so. See, that fellow Callahan killed. His family's got money, lots of it. They don't buy this avalanche story." Cooper dismounted, walking closer. "They're offering $1,000 now. That's enough to set a widow up real nice." Eleanor forced herself to keep scrubbing. "Can't collect bounty on a dead man. No, but you could collect a reward for information." He was close enough now that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Maybe you saw something. Maybe someone's been helping out around here. That fence looks awful new. I hired help from town." "Who?" "That's my business." Cooper's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "I'm making it mine." The crack of a rifle split the air. Cooper's hat flew off. A neat hole punched through the crown. He released Eleanor, spinning toward the barn. "Next one goes through your head." Luke's voice, calm and deadly. "Step away from her." Cooper raised his hand slowly. Well, guess that trapper was right after all." Luke emerged from the barn, rifle steady. "Get on your horses and ride out. Don't come back." "Can't do that, friend. $1,000 is a lot of money." Cooper was smiling again. "Besides, there's 3 of us and 1 of you." "2," Eleanor said quietly. She'd retrieved the shotgun, had it trained on the other riders. "And at this range, I don't need to be a good shot." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Cooper laughed. "You've got sand. Lady, I'll give you that." He backed toward his horse. "But this isn't over. We'll be back. Maybe we'll wait until your man here goes to town. Have ourselves a nice visit." The threat hung in the air as they rode off. Luke lowered his rifle, jaw tight with fury. "Pack what you need," he said. "We're leaving." "No." Eleanor set down the shotgun. "This is my land, my home. I'm not running." "Eleanor, you don't understand. Men like that." "I understand fine." She turned to face him. "I spent 5 years living with threats and fear. I won't do it again. Not for them. Not for anyone." Luke stared at her. This slight woman with steel in her spine. They'll come back. Tonight, maybe tomorrow, and there'll be more of them. Then we'd better be ready. They spent the day preparing. Luke showed her how to load and fire his rifle, how to lead a moving target. They barricaded windows, set up firing positions, laid out ammunition. As the sun set, Eleanor made coffee and a simple meal, both of them too tense to eat much. You could still leave, Luke said quietly. Ride to town, stay with who? The people who've been calling me a killer and worse? Eleanor shook her head. My place is here, with you. This is my fight, my past catching up. No. She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. It's our fight now. That's what partnership means. Luke turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. I never meant for this to happen. Any of it. Coming here, staying, caring about. He stopped, struggling with words. I know. Eleanor's voice was soft. I didn't mean for it either, but here we are. They sat in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, drawing strength from the connection. Finally. Luke stood, pulling her up with him. For a moment they stood close, her hand still in his, bodies almost touching. Eleanor. His free hand came up to cup her cheek. If something happens tonight, don't. She pressed her fingers to his lips. We're going to survive this, both of us. He kissed her fingers, then her palm, then drew her against him. This kiss was different from their first, desperate, hungry, full of things they might never get to say. Eleanor clung to him, pouring all her fear and hope and growing love into the contact. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. When this is over, he said roughly, when we're safe, I want God, Eleanor, I want everything, a real life, a future. With you. Yes, she whispered. Yes. A sound outside made them spring apart. Luke grabbed his rifle, moving to the window. Eleanor took position at the other window with a shotgun. See anything? She asked. Not yet, but they're out there. The wait was agony. Every sound could be an approach. Every shadow could hide a threat. Eleanor's hands cramped from gripping the shotgun. Then, just as the moon rose full and bright, she saw movement. West side, she breathed. I see them. 2 more coming from the east. Luke's voice was steady. Remember what I taught you. Breathe easy, squeeze slow. The first shot came from outside, shattering the window near Eleanor's head. She ducked as glass showered down, then rose and fired. A man cried out, stumbling back, then chaos. Gunfire from multiple directions, the acrid smell of powder. Luke's rifle cracking steady as a heartbeat. Eleanor reloaded. Fired. Reloaded again. A man tried to rush the door. Luke dropped him 3 feet from the porch. Eleanor, you hit. I'm fine. She wasn't, not really. Glass had cut her cheek, and her shoulder ached from the shotgun's kick, but she was alive, and that was what mattered. More gunfire. Then Cooper's voice. This doesn't have to end bloody. Callahan, give yourself up, and we leave the woman be. Go to hell, Eleanor shouted back, surprising herself with the vehemence. Luke actually smiled. That's my girl, he murmured. The assault continued. But their position was strong, their ammunition holding. One by one, the attacks grew less coordinated. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Cooper, Luke called. You still breathing? A pause. For now. Eat, take your men and go. This isn't worth dying for. Maybe not, but that $1,000 is blood money from a family that can't accept their boy died pulling a knife on the wrong man. That what you want on your conscience? Silence stretched. Then, we've got 2 wounded. We're pulling out. They listened to the sounds of retreat horses being mounted. Wounded men groaning. Hoofbeats fading into the night. Neither moved for long minutes after the last sound died away. Are they gone? Eleanor whispered. For now. Luke crossed to her, hands running over her arms, her shoulders, checking for injuries. Your face, just a cut. She caught his hands. I'm all right. We're all right. The relief hit them both at once. Eleanor started laughing, high and slightly hysterical. Luke pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. "You magnificent, impossible woman," he muttered. "You could have been killed. So could you." She pulled back to look at him. "But we weren't." "We won. This time, they might come back. Let them—" Eleanor's eyes blazed. "Let them all come. I'm done being afraid. Luke, I'm done letting other people dictate how I live." He stared at her. This woman who'd transformed from a cowed widow into a warrior. "Marry me." The words hung between them, surprising them both. "What?" "Marry me," Luke repeated, more certain now. "I know it's madness. I know I'm a wanted man with nothing to offer but trouble. But Eleanor, She kissed him, fierce and sure. "Yes, yes, yes, I'll marry you, you impossible man." She was crying now, but smiling through it. "Though God knows what we'll tell the preacher. The truth, that Luke Callahan is dead, but—" He paused, thinking, "What was your maiden name?" "Turner. Eleanor May Turner." "Then Eleanor May Turner is marrying." He smiled. "Thomas Walker, a farmer from Ohio who came west to start over." "Thomas." She tested the name. "I can work with Thomas." They stood in their shot-up cabin, glass glittering on the floor, powder smoke still heavy in the air, and planned their future. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was perfect. "We'll need witnesses," Eleanor said practically. "And I'll need a dress that isn't full of holes. I'll build us a new bedroom." Luke Thomas promised, "with a real door, and windows that don't leak. And we'll plant a garden, vegetables and flowers both. Raise horses, maybe. I'm good with horses." They talked until dawn, spinning dreams from nothing but hope and determination. When the sun rose, it found them on the porch. Eleanor tucked against Luke's side, watching light spill across their land, their future, their choice. "No more running," Luke said quietly. "No more hiding." Eleanor agreed. And in that moment, with the new day breaking around them, anything seemed possible. The morning after the gunfight, they cleaned glass and patched bullet holes in companionable silence. But something had shifted between them with Luke's proposal and Eleanor's acceptance. Every casual touch lingered. Every glance held weight. The careful distance they'd maintained was crumbling like old mortar. It happened while they were boarding up the broken window. Eleanor reached for a nail just as Luke did, their hands colliding. But instead of pulling back as they'd done countless times before, Luke caught her hand, turning it palm up in his larger one. "Your hands are so small," he murmured, tracing the calluses with his thumb. "How do you manage such hard work with these delicate things?" "They're not delicate." Eleanor's voice came out breathier than intended. "They're strong. Strong. Yes." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to each fingertip. "Beautiful, too." Eleanor's breath caught. The morning sun slanted through the remaining windows, turning dust motes to gold and highlighting the silver threads in Luke's dark hair. She reached up with her free hand, touching the scar on his neck she'd noticed that first day. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." His eyes darkened. "Nothing hurts when you touch me." The hammer slipped from Eleanor's other hand, clattering on the floor. Neither moved to retrieve it. Luke's hands came up to frame her face, thumbs stroking her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. "Eleanor," he breathed. "My Eleanor." "Yes," she whispered. "Yours." This kiss was different from the desperate ones they'd shared before. This was slow, exploring, a promise of time they now believed they'd have. Eleanor's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. His arms came around her, one hand tangling in her hair, the other spread across her back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. Luke rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. The window. To hell with the window." Eleanor surprised herself with the profanity, but she was past caring about propriety. "Luke, I know. His voice was rough. God help me, I know. He kissed her again, backing her against the wall. Eleanor went willingly, eagerly. 5 years of emptiness crying out to be filled. Her hands found skin beneath his shirt, mapping scars and muscle with growing boldness. Not here, Luke managed, pulling back with visible effort. Not against a wall like, you deserve better. Eleanor looked at him, this man who'd killed to survive but still worried about her dignity. Love crashed over her like a spring flood. Then take me to bed, she said simply, Luke's control visibly frayed. Eleanor, we're not married yet. We've said our vows to each other. That's enough for me. She took his hand, placed it over her heart. Can you feel that? How it races. That's for you. Only you. Luke groaned, capturing her mouth again. This time when he pulled back, it was to sweep her up in his arms. Eleanor gasped, arms going around his neck. I can walk. Hush. He carried her to her small bedroom, shouldering open the door. Let me do this properly. He set her down gently beside the bed, then stood back, suddenly uncertain. In the soft morning light, they looked at each other with new eyes. Eleanor reached up, unpinning her hair with shaking fingers. It fell around her shoulders in dark waves. Beautiful, Luke breathed. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Samuel had taken her in darkness, quickly, sometimes painfully. This slow appreciation, this reverence, was foreign territory. I should tell you, she said hesitantly. My marriage, it wasn't... I don't know much about pleasure, about what's supposed to happen between... Luke crossed to her in 2 strides, silencing her with a gentle finger to her lips. Then we'll learn together, as slow as you need. If you want to stop, I won't. Eleanor caught his hand, kissing his palm. I've never wanted anything the way I want this. Want you. What followed was a revelation. Luke's hands, so deadly with a rifle, were infinitely gentle as they helped her with buttons and laces. His lips followed, pressing reverent kisses to each new expanse of skin revealed. Eleanor had never known she could feel so cherished, so desired. When shyness overtook her, standing in only her chemise, Luke stopped immediately. We don't have to... No. Eleanor lifted her chin, finding courage in his eyes. I want to see you too. Luke smiled, slow and warm, and began unbuttoning his shirt. Eleanor had glimpsed him shirtless once before, but this was different. This time she could look her fill, could reach out and trace the map of scars across his chest. The war? She asked softly. Some after. He caught her hand, holding it against his heart. All in the past now. They came together slowly, carefully, like 2 wounded creatures learning to trust. Luke laid her on the bed as if she were spun glass, then simply looked at her for a long moment. What? Eleanor asked, fighting the urge to cover herself. Trying to believe you're real. He stretched out beside her, propping himself on one elbow. That this is real. It's real. Eleanor drew him down for a kiss. We're real. What followed was unlike anything in Eleanor's limited experience. Luke took his time, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch beneath him. His hands and mouth worshipped every inch of her, patient even when she could feel his own need in the tension of his muscles. Please, she finally gasped, not even sure what she was begging for. I've got you. Luke's voice was strained but tender. Trust me, love, I've got you. And he did. When they finally joined, it was with a sweetness that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Luke kissed them away, murmuring endearments against her skin. They moved together, finding rhythm, finding completion, finding home. Afterward, they lay entwined, afternoon sun painting gold stripes across the bed. Eleanor traced lazy patterns on Luke's chest, marveling at the freedom to touch him. Did I? She struggled for words. Luke tilted her chin up, kissing her thoroughly. You were perfect. Are perfect. He studied her face. Did I hurt you? No. Eleanor smiled, feeling wonderfully languid. Quite the opposite. They dozed, woke to make love again, this time with more confidence, more playfulness. Eleanor discovered she could make this strong man groan with just a touch, could reduce him to pleading with her mouth. It was heady knowledge. As evening approached, they finally left the bed, both ravenous. Luke pulled on his trousers while Eleanor wrapped herself in a robe, and they raided the kitchen like guilty children. "We still need to fix that window," Eleanor observed, gesturing at the boarded-up frame with a piece of bread. "Tomorrow." Luke pulled her onto his lap. "Tonight, I have better plans." Eleanor laughed, feeling younger than she had in years. "Oh? And what might those be?" He whispered suggestions in her ear that made her blush scarlet. "Luke Callahan. Where did you learn such things?" "Thomas Walker," he corrected with a grin. "And I'm making them up as I go. We have years of lost time to make up for. Mrs., soon-to-be Walker." The name sobered them both slightly. Tomorrow they'd have to face the world, the lies necessary for their survival. But tonight was theirs. They made love again by firelight, slow and sweet. Eleanor felt herself blooming under Luke's hands, discovering desires she'd never known existed. When she cried out his name in pleasure, he held her close, whispering promises against her hair. "I'll make you happy," he vowed. "Whatever it takes, however long I have, I'll make you happy." "You already have," Eleanor said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Later, as they lay watching embers die in the hearth, Eleanor remembered something. "We never finished boarding the window." Luke chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest where her head rested. "First thing tomorrow, after all. Can't have the neighbors peeking in on newlyweds. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. Then we'd better make enough noise that they hear us anyway." Eleanor swatted his chest, laughing. "Scandalous man. You're scandalous man," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Yes," she agreed, snuggling closer. "Mine." They fell asleep like that, skin to skin, hearts beating in rhythm. Outside, wind whistled through the bullet holes in the walls. But inside they were warm, safe, complete. For the first time in her life, Eleanor understood what it meant to be truly touched, body and soul, heart and mind. And Luke, who'd been running so long he'd forgotten what stillness felt like, finally understood what it meant to be home. The morning would bring challenges. They'd need to create their new identities, face down gossip, build a life from the ashes of their pasts. But for now, in the quiet darkness with Eleanor in his arms, Luke Callahan let himself believe in tomorrow. And Eleanor, who'd survived Samuel's cruelty and the town's judgment, who'd faced down bounty hunters with a shotgun and steady hands, discovered that the bravest thing she'd ever done was letting herself be loved. The window could wait. Their new life could not. The news came 3 days later, delivered by young Billy Morrison from town. Eleanor was hanging laundry while Luke worked on the roof when the boy rode up, his horse lathered with sweat. "Mrs. Hutchinson," Billy called, barely reining in before tumbling from the saddle. "Sheriff Watson sent me. Those men, the bounty hunters, they're coming back." With papers from a judge. Eleanor's hand stilled on the wet sheet. "From the roof," she heard Luke's hammer stop. "What kind of papers?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Don't know exactly, ma'am, but the sheriff said to warn you they've got legal backing now. Something about property seizure if you're harboring a fugitive." Billy glanced nervously at the roof. "Sheriff said, he said to tell Thomas Walker he's done all he can." Luke climbed down the ladder, moving deliberately calm. Billy's eyes widened at the sight of him, but the boy held his tongue. "When?" Luke asked. "Tomorrow, maybe day after. They're gathering more men in Cheyenne." Billy shifted nervously. "Sheriff said to tell you he's sorry. Said you should consider other options." Eleanor pressed a coin into Billy's hand. "Thank you. Now get home before your ma worries." After the boy rode off, they stood in the yard, laundry forgotten. The life they'd started building seemed suddenly fragile as spun glass. "We could run," Luke said finally. Head north to Montana. Maybe Canada. No! Eleanor's jaw set stubborn. I told you, I'm done running. Eleanor, be reasonable. They have legal papers now. We can't fight the law. Can't we? She turned to him, eyes blazing. The law that let Samuel beat me bloody. The law that says a man can defend himself unless he's poor and the other man's rich? That law? This is different. Is it? Eleanor grabbed his hands. Luke, Thomas, whoever you are, I don't care. We're getting married. Tomorrow. Before they come. He stared at her. Eleanor, if we're married, I can't be compelled to testify against you. It's the law, one of the few that actually protects wives. Her grip tightened. We'll ride to Millbrook tonight. Judge Carpenter there owes me. I nursed his wife through pneumonia 2 winters back. He'll marry us. And then what? We come back here and wait for them. Eleanor smiled, sharp as a blade. Then we make it not worth their while. That night, they rode through darkness to Millbrook, 20 miles through rough country. Judge Carpenter, roused from sleep, looked between them with knowing eyes but asked no questions. His wife stood witness, along with their hired man, as Eleanor May Turner married Thomas Walker in the judge's parlor. Not the wedding you deserve, Luke murmured as they signed the papers. It's the wedding I want. Eleanor replied firmly. Judge Carpenter cleared his throat. Mrs. Walker, might I suggest you register this marriage in several places? County seat, territorial records? Paper trails can be useful things. Eleanor met his eyes gratefully. We'll do that. They rode back as dawn broke, exhausted but legally bound. At the cabin, Eleanor went straight to her father's old trunk, pulling out documents she'd hidden there. What are you doing? Making it expensive. She spread papers on the table. This land, it's not just mine. Samuel bought it, yes, but with money borrowed from 3 different men. I've been paying them back slowly. She smiled grimly. What do you think happens if suddenly the widow disappears or dies under mysterious circumstances? Luke studied the papers. The creditors would want their money. Every penny, and they'd go after whoever was responsible for their loss. Eleanor pulled out another document. Then there's this Samuel's life insurance policy, paid out to me but held in trust at the bank. If I die without clear cause, it gets investigated. You've been planning this. I've been surviving. There's a difference. She looked at him. Those bounty hunters want you for money, so we make it cost more than you're worth. Luke pulled her close. You terrify me sometimes. You know that. Good. She kissed him quick. Now help me write some letters. They spent the day creating a paper fortress. Letters to creditors explaining the threat against them. A will leaving everything to Judge Carpenter's wife for her kindness during my illness. Ensuring powerful people would want answers if Eleanor died. Documents filed with territorial authorities about harassment and threats against a widow. As evening approached, they prepared for siege. But Eleanor had one more card to play. Put on your best clothes, she told Luke. Why? Because we're going to town, to Murphy's store, at the busiest time of day. Luke stared at her. Have you lost your mind? Trust me. They rode into town as the Saturday market was in full swing. Eleanor wore her wedding dress from years ago, altered and cleaned. Luke wore Samuel's best suit, tailored to fit. They looked respectable, normal, married. The conversation stopped as they tied up outside Murphy's. Eleanor took Luke's arm, chin high, and walked into the store. Mrs. Hutchinson, Murphy started, then saw the rings. I mean, Mrs. Walker. Eleanor said clearly, I'd like you to meet my husband, Thomas Walker. We were married last night by Judge Carpenter. The store was packed. Everyone heard. Everyone stared. Thomas comes from Ohio. Eleanor continued conversationally, selecting items as if this were any ordinary day. He's a farmer, widowed in the war, like so many. We met when he sheltered here during the storm. But Murphy's wife couldn't help herself. What about that Callahan fellow, the one who died in an avalanche? Luke said calmly. Terrible thing. I found his horse wandering after, brought it back to Mrs. Hutchinson, Mrs. Walker now. She was kind enough to let me stay on and help with repairs. The lie was bold, delivered to a room full of people who suspected the truth. But what could they prove? Luke Callahan was officially dead. Thomas Walker had a marriage certificate. Well, Murphy cleared his throat. Congratulations, I suppose. Thank you. Eleanor smiled sweetly. Oh, and Mr. Murphy? Those men who were asking about my first husband's death? You might tell them that Judge Carpenter has taken a personal interest in my welfare, and that the territorial marshal is his brother-in-law. They left with their purchases and the whole town talking. As they rode home, Luke shook his head. That was either brilliant or insane. Both, Eleanor admitted. But now we're established. Thomas Walker exists. He has a wife, a history, witnesses to his character. And when those bounty hunters come, they'll find Thomas and Eleanor Walker legally married, with powerful friends and financial entanglements that make us more trouble than we're worth. They were barely home when riders appeared on the ridge. Not bounty hunters. Sheriff Watson with 2 deputies. Mrs. Walker, Watson said carefully. Mr. Walker, heard congratulations are in order. Thank you, Sheriff. Eleanor didn't relax her guard. Watson dismounted slowly. Those fellows from Kansas are about an hour behind us. They've got papers saying they can search your property for Luke Callahan. Then they're welcome to search, Luke said. They won't find him. Man's dead, as you well know. Watson studied him for a long moment. Yeah, I suppose he is. He turned to his deputies. You boys remember that. Should anyone ask, Luke Callahan died in an avalanche. We never found the body, but we found enough of his gear to be sure. The deputies nodded. Watson turned back to Eleanor and Luke. Can't stop them from searching, but I can make sure they do it legal and proper. No harassment of law-abiding citizens. He paused. Especially citizens who are friends with Judge Carpenter. Eleanor felt some tension ease. We appreciate that. Sheriff. The bounty hunters arrived as promised. Cooper and 4 others, including a man in a city suit who looked like a lawyer. They presented their papers with smug confidence. Search away, Eleanor said coolly. Though you'll find no one here but Thomas Walker and his wife. They searched, thoroughly. While they did, the lawyer questioned Luke about his history, trying to trip him up. But Luke had spent 3 days memorizing the life Eleanor had created for him. Every question had an answer. Every detail fit. Finally. Cooper confronted them directly. We know who you are. Do you? Luke asked mildly. Then you know I'm a farmer from Ohio who married a widow. Nothing illegal in that. You're Luke Callahan. Luke Callahan is dead. Sheriff Watson interjected. I filed the report myself. Cooper's face reddened. This is murder. Careful, Eleanor interrupted. Slander is actionable, and my husband and I have resources now. Judge Carpenter has offered to represent us should anyone make false accusations. The lawyer touched Cooper's arm, whispering urgently. Cooper's expression darkened as he realized the trap they'd walked into. Even if they were right, proving it would be expensive. Fighting it in court against a territorial judge would be ruinous. And for what? A bounty that would be eaten up in legal fees. This isn't over, Cooper snarled. Yes, Sheriff Watson said firmly. It is. You've searched. You've found nothing. Luke Callahan is dead. These good people have been patient, but my patience is at an end. Time for you gentlemen to move along. They left, but not without threats and dark looks. Eleanor didn't relax until they were out of sight. It's done, she breathed. For now, Luke warned. They might come back. Let them. Eleanor turned in his arms. We're legally married. You have a new identity. The town accepts it because fighting it is too much trouble. We've won. That night, as they lay in bed actually married, actually safe for the moment, Luke marveled at the woman beside him. You saved me, he said softly. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, Eleanor corrected. That's what partners do. He kissed her then, pouring all his gratitude and love into the contact. When they made love, it was with a new tenderness, a sense of permanence they'd hardly dared hope for. Later, as Eleanor slept in his arms, Luke, Thomas now, truly stared at the ceiling and made silent promises. He'd be the husband she deserved, build the life she'd fought for, prove worthy of the chances she'd taken. Outside, an owl called in the darkness, but inside their cabin, their home, all was warmth and peace and possibility. The past was dead and buried with Luke Callahan. The future belonged to Thomas and Eleanor Walker, and that future, hard-won and precious, was finally theirs to shape. 2 weeks passed in tentative peace. Luke, now Thomas in public and in Eleanor's careful words, threw himself into improving their small farm. He repaired the chicken coop properly this time, expanded the vegetable garden, and started breaking a new field for planting. Eleanor watched him work with a mixture of love and lingering fear, still half expecting armed men to appear on the horizon. It was a Tuesday morning when their fragile peace shattered. Eleanor was kneading bread when she heard horses, many horses, moving fast. Her hand stilled on the dough as Luke appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. "Stay inside," he said quietly, but Eleanor was already reaching for the shotgun. Through the window, she counted 8 riders, and her heart sank. Not bounty hunters this time. These men wore badges. The lead rider was a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes. A U.S. Marshal's star gleamed on his vest. "Thomas Walker," the marshal called, "or should I say Luke Callahan. I'm Marshal James Hartley. I have a federal warrant for your arrest." Eleanor felt the world tilt. Federal. This was beyond Sheriff Watson's influence, beyond Judge Carpenter's protection. Luke stepped onto the porch, rifle lowered but ready. "Luke Callahan is dead." "So I've heard." Hartley dismounted, moving with the confidence of a man who'd never met a situation he couldn't control. "Funny thing, though, the territorial governor received a very interesting letter last week from a Mr. Morrison. I believe you met him. He's willing to testify that he saw Luke Callahan alive and well, shot him, in fact, in self-defense, of course." Eleanor joined Luke on the porch, shotgun visible. "My husband is Thomas Walker. We have a marriage certificate to prove it." Hartley's smile was thin. "Ma'am, I admire your loyalty, but fraud is a federal crime, as is evading justice." He focused on Luke. "You can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way. Either way, you're coming with me." "Where?" Eleanor demanded. "Cheyenne first, then back to Kansas for trial." Hartley's eyes never left Luke. "You've led us quite a chase, Callahan, but it ends now." Eleanor felt Luke tense beside her, calculating odds. 8 armed federal officers, no cover, no chance. "Wait," she said desperately. "You said Morrison wrote a letter. Is he here? Will he testify in person?" Hartley frowned. "He's recovering from his wound, but his sworn statement means nothing without cross-examination." Eleanor lifted her chin. "I demand a hearing. Here, with Judge Carpenter presiding. If you're so certain of your case, prove it properly." "Ma'am, I don't need—" "Yes, you do." Eleanor's mind raced. "You're arresting a man based on one letter? From someone who has financial interest in the bounty? Judge Carpenter is a territorial judge. He has jurisdiction, unless you want to explain to the governor why you ignored proper procedure." Hartley's jaw tightened. He was a by-the-book man. Eleanor had guessed right, and territorial politics were delicate. Offending a well-connected judge could cause problems. "Fine," he said finally. "We'll do this proper, but my men will be watching this place day and night. If Callahan, Walker, whoever he is tries to run, we'll cut him down." They made camp just beyond the property line, visible reminders of the tightening noose. Eleanor sent word to Judge Carpenter, praying he'd come. Then she sat at the table with Luke, holding his hands. "I should run," he said quietly. "Lead them away from you." "No." Her grip tightened. "We face this together." "Eleanor, if they take me back to Kansas—" "They won't." She stood, pacing. "Morrison's wounded. He might not even come. And without him, all they have is hearsay." But Luke knew better. He'd seen too many men hang on less evidence than this. That night, they made love with desperate tenderness, both aware it might be their last time. Eleanor woke alone. The bed beside her was cold, and she knew with sick certainty that Luke had left. On the pillow lay a letter, his careful handwriting blurred by her tears as she read, "My dearest Eleanor, I cannot let you sacrifice more for me. You gave me months of happiness I never deserved. Live well. Forget Luke Callahan. Let Thomas Walker fade away. Be free. All my love. L." "No." Eleanor crumpled the letter. "No, no, no!" She dressed frantically, grabbing the rifle. Outside, the marshal's camp was stirring. They'd notice soon that their quarry was gone. Think, Eleanor. Think like Luke. He wouldn't go south, too obvious. North was blocked by the marshal's men. West led to mountains, but his horse couldn't handle the steep trails, not fast enough to matter. East, toward the old mine shafts. Eleanor saddled her mare in the pre-dawn darkness, moving by feel and familiarity. She had to find him before the marshal did, had to make him understand that life without him wasn't freedom, it was just another kind of prison. She picked up his trail as the sun rose, following broken branches and hoofprints in the soft earth. Behind her, she could hear shouts as the marshal's men discovered Luke's escape. Time was running out. The abandoned silver mine loomed against the morning sky, its shaft a dark mouth in the hillside. Luke's horse stood outside, sides heaving. Eleanor dismounted, creeping carefully to the entrance. "Luke? Go home. Eleanor?" His voice echoed from the darkness. "Please, no." She stepped into the mine, letting her eyes adjust. "You don't get to make that choice for me." He emerged from the shadows, face haggard. "I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need my husband." She moved closer. "The man who promised to make me happy, who promised a future together. That man is a fiction. That man is you." Eleanor grabbed his arms. "Luke, Thomas, I don't care what name you use. You're my husband, mine, and I'll be damned if I let you throw that away." "Eleanor," she kissed him, fierce and desperate. When she pulled back, both of them were breathing hard. "You listen to me, Luke Callahan," she said against his lips. "I have lost everything in my life, my childhood to my father's drinking, my youth to Samuel's fists, my reputation to widows' gossip. I will not lose you too. Not to bounty hunters, not to marshals, and certainly not to your misplaced nobility." Luke's hands came up to cup her face. "I can't let you watch me hang." "Then don't hang." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "Fight. We'll get Judge Carpenter. We'll make our case, and if that fails—" She took a breath. "Then we run together, north to Canada, west to California. I don't care where, as long as it's together. You'd do that? Leave everything?" "You are everything." She pressed her forehead to his. "Don't you understand that yet?" The sound of approaching horses made them both tense, but instead of the marshal's shouts, they heard a familiar voice. Mrs. Walker, you in there?" "Sheriff Watson." Eleanor nearly sobbed with relief. "Sheriff, we're here." Watson appeared at the mine entrance, backlit by morning sun. "Thought I might find you here. Judge Carpenter's arrived. He's none too pleased about being summoned, but he's ready to hold a hearing." He looked at Luke. "You willing to come peaceful?" Luke looked at Eleanor, then nodded. "I'm done running." They rode back together, the marshal's men closing in around them like wolves. At the cabin, Judge Carpenter had set up in the main room, looking irritated but official. "This is highly irregular," he announced. "But Mrs. Walker made a good point about due process. Marshal Hartley, present your evidence." Hartley laid out his case. Morrison's letter, the bounty from Kansas, witness reports of a man matching Luke's description. It sounded damning, laid out so coldly. "And your defense, Mr. Walker." Luke stood straight. "My name is Luke Callahan. I killed a man in Kansas 2 years ago, in self-defense. I fled because I knew I wouldn't get a fair trial. The dead man was connected, and I was nobody." He looked at Eleanor. "I came here running from that. Found something worth stopping for. Eleanor stood beside him. Your Honor, we're not denying Luke's identity. We're questioning whether justice is being served by pursuing a man for defending himself. The law's clear, Hartley began. The law's bought and paid for by whoever has the deepest pockets. Eleanor shot back. How much is the bounty now? Marshal, $1,000? Does justice have a price tag? Judge Carpenter held up a hand. I've heard enough. He was quiet for a long moment, then spoke carefully. Marshal Hartley, you have a valid warrant. However, the evidence of Mr. Callahan's guilt in the original crime seems questionable. I'm ordering a full review of the case before any extradition. Your Honor. Furthermore, Carpenter continued, Mr. and Mrs. Walker will remain in my custody during this review. They'll stay here, under guard if you insist, but they will not be removed from territorial jurisdiction without my express permission. It wasn't freedom, but it was time. Eleanor gripped Luke's hand as the marshal grudgingly agreed. That night, with guards posted outside, Eleanor and Luke sat by their fire like condemned prisoners granted a reprieve. It's not over, Luke said quietly. No, Eleanor agreed. But it's not ended either, and as long as we're together, we have a chance. Luke pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. How did I find you? Out of all the places I could have stopped, all the doors I could have knocked on. Maybe you weren't the only one being saved, Eleanor said softly. Maybe we were always meant to find each other. Two broken people who make one whole life. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn low. Tomorrow would bring new battles, lawyers and testimonies and the weight of law against them. But tonight they had each other, and that was enough. In the darkness outside, Marshal Hartley's men kept watch. In the house, Eleanor and Luke Walker held tight to their stolen time, knowing that dawn always comes too soon for the condemned, but also knowing that sometimes, against all odds, love could be its own form of justice. And that was worth fighting for until the very end. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a territorial courier who looked relieved to be rid of it. Judge Carpenter read it aloud in the cabin, his voice growing grimmer with each word. The Kansas authorities have agreed to a new trial, he said finally. But only if Luke Callahan presents himself voluntarily. Morrison has agreed to testify, along with 2 new witnesses who claim to have seen the fight. Eleanor felt her hope crumble. New witnesses, after 2 years? Bought and paid for, most likely, Luke said quietly. The family wants blood. Judge Carpenter set down the letter. You have a choice. Stand trial in Kansas, where the outcome seems predetermined. Or, Eleanor leaned forward. Or remain here as Thomas Walker, but Marshal Hartley will be watching. One mistake, one slip, and they'll have grounds to take you by force. That night, as they lay together, Eleanor could feel Luke's restlessness like a living thing. I should go, he murmured against her hair. Face it, end this one way or another. That's not ending it, that's giving up. Eleanor turned in his arms. There has to be another way. What if there isn't? What if this is all we get, these stolen moments while the world closes in? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then, do you remember what you told me? About making new land when the old is poisoned? Yes. Maybe it's time. She sat up, decision crystallizing. Luke, what if the witnesses are telling the truth? He frowned. What do you mean? What if Luke Callahan did kill that man? Not in cold blood, but not clean self-defense either. What if it was messier than that? Luke was silent, but she felt the truth in his stillness. Tell me, she said gently. All of it. So he did. The poker game in Dodge City, the accusations of cheating, false but believed, the mayor's nephew, drunk and mean, pulling a knife, the struggle, and yes, the moment when Luke could have stopped, when the man was down but not dead, and Luke's war-trained hands finished what fear and fury had started. I didn't mean to, he said hoarsely, but I didn't stop when I could have. Does that make me a murderer? Eleanor took his face in her hands. It makes you human, flawed and scarred and human. She kissed him gently. And still mine. The next morning, Eleanor asked to speak with Marshal Hartley alone. The marshal, surprised, agreed. "I want to make a deal," she said without preamble. Hartley's eyes narrowed. "I don't make deals with women trying to save their husbands." "Then perhaps you should start." Eleanor pulled out a stack of papers. "Do you know what these are? Enlighten me." "Letters from the 3 men Samuel owed money to, each one threatening foreclosure if their debts aren't paid." She smiled thinly. "Debts I can't pay if my husband is hanged in Kansas. That's not my concern." "No? What about this one?" She pulled out another letter. "From the territorial governor's wife, thanking me for nursing her through scarlet fever last year. She asks after my health regularly. Imagine her distress when she learns federal officers drove me to bankruptcy." Hartley's jaw tightened. "You're threatening me." "I'm negotiating. There's a difference." Eleanor leaned forward. "What do you really want, Marshal? Justice? Or just to close a case? The law requires a lot of things that never happen. What I'm asking is, what would satisfy you, personally?" Hartley studied her for a long moment. "You're asking me to let a killer go free. I'm asking you to consider alternative justice." Eleanor chose her words carefully. "What if Luke Callahan could pay for his crime without hanging? What if there was a way to balance the scales?" "Go on." "The family wants blood money. Fine, we'll pay it. Every penny of the bounty, given to the dead man's family. Plus," she took a breath, "community service. Real work that helps real people. Building schools, digging wells, whatever the territory needs. Years of it. That's not how the law is what men like you make it." Eleanor interrupted. "You have discretion? Use it." Hartley was quiet for a long time. Finally, "Even if I agreed, the Kansas authorities wouldn't. They want a trial." "Then give them one." Eleanor smiled. "A trial where Luke Callahan confesses to killing in the heat of passion, not premeditated murder. Where witnesses testify to his character since then, all the people he's helped, the life he's built. Where a judge considers time served in running and reformation. You're asking for a miracle. I'm asking for mercy. There's a difference." That evening, Eleanor presented her plan to Luke and Judge Carpenter. The judge looked thoughtful. "It's unconventional," he admitted. "But there's precedent. Territorial judges have wide latitude in cases like this." He looked at Luke. "You'd have to confess publicly, no claims of pure self-defense, but also no lies," Eleanor added quickly. "Just the messy, human truth." Luke was silent for a long moment. Then, "Would I keep my freedom?" "Probationary freedom," Judge Carpenter said. "You'd be Thomas Walker, a man with a past who's paying his debts. Any violation, any crime, and you'd face the original charges plus new ones. For how long? 5 years, maybe 10. Luke looked at Eleanor. "And you'd be tied to a confessed killer. Your reputation, my reputation, is mine to spend." Eleanor said firmly, "And I choose to spend it on our future." The trial was held in the territorial capital, a compromise that took weeks to arrange. Eleanor sat in the front row as Luke, identifying himself as both Luke Callahan and Thomas Walker, told his story, the war, the drift afterward, the fight in Dodge City, brutal in its honesty. "I killed James Morrison," he said clearly. "In anger and fear, I killed him. I've regretted it every day since." The Kansas prosecutor, brought in specially, pushed for the death penalty. But then came the character witnesses, Judge Carpenter, Sheriff Watson, grudging but honest. Even Murphy from the general store, admitting that Thomas Walker had always dealt fairly with him. Finally, Eleanor took the stand. "Mrs. Walker," the prosecutor said with false sympathy, "you've been deceived by this man. Surely you see—" "I see clearly." Eleanor interrupted. "I see a man who made a terrible mistake and has tried to atone for it. I see someone who protected me, who worked honest labor, who chose love over running when he could have disappeared. He's a killer." "Yes, Eleanor met Luke's eyes. "And I was a battered wife who celebrated her husband's death. We're all sinners here, sir. The question is whether we believe in redemption." The judge, not Carpenter, but a federal appointee, deliberated for hours. When he returned, his face was unreadable. "Luke Callahan, you have confessed to manslaughter. The court acknowledges the circumstances, your service in the war, and your conduct since. Therefore, this court sentences you to 10 years, suspended." Eleanor's heart stopped. "You will pay restitution to the Morrison family, $1,000. You will serve this territory in whatever capacity the governor deems fit for no less than 5 years. You will report monthly to federal authorities. Any violation of these terms will result in immediate imprisonment. You're letting him go." The prosecutor was outraged. "I'm giving him a chance to prove the sincerity of his remorse." The judge corrected. "Justice isn't always about punishment. Counselor, sometimes it's about redemption." Outside the courthouse, Luke pulled Eleanor into his arms, both of them shaking with relief. 5 years, he murmured. 5 years of watching every step. 5 years of building our life," Eleanor corrected. "Together." Marshal Hartley approached, looking resigned. "You're a fortunate man, Walker. Don't waste this chance." "I won't." Luke offered his hand. "Thank you." Hartley studied him, then shook. "Thank your wife. She's the one who convinced me redemption might be possible." He touched his hat to Eleanor. "Ma'am." They returned to their cabin to find it full of flowers. Wildflowers picked by neighbors who'd heard the news. Not approval, exactly, but acceptance. A chance. That night, as they lay in their bed, their marriage bed, their future bed, Eleanor traced patterns on Luke's chest. "Was it worth it?" he asked softly. "All of this, just to save a broken-down soldier. You saved me first." Eleanor reminded him. "From a life half-lived, from believing I deserved nothing more than survival. We saved each other, then. Yes." She smiled in the darkness. "And now we get to live, really live, plant those gardens, raise those horses, build something worth having. 10 years of being watched, of being judged. 10 years of being together," Eleanor corrected. "The rest is just detail." Luke pulled her close, marveling again at this woman who'd fought the federal government for him, who'd schemed and negotiated and refused to give up. "I love you, Eleanor Walker," he said. "And I love you, Thomas Walker, Luke Callahan, every version of you." Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing green to the mountains. Eleanor and Luke, Thomas to the world, worked side by side, building their life board by board, seed by seed. He reported faithfully to the federal office in town, worked on the new schoolhouse, helped dig a well for the church, and if sometimes the good people of the town whispered about the killer and his widow, Eleanor didn't care. She had her husband, her home, her future. She had won her war. The cabin that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with purpose. The land that had been poisoned by Samuel's cruelty bloomed under careful tending. And 2 broken people, scarred but not defeated, proved that sometimes love wasn't just about passion or romance. Sometimes it was about choosing to fight for each other against all odds. Sometimes it was about forgiveness of others and yourself. And sometimes, in the wild territories where law was more suggestion than fact, it was about writing your own justice with whatever ink you had. Eleanor stood in her garden one evening, watching Luke work with the horses, and felt peace settle into her bones. Not the peace of the grave she'd once thought was her only escape, but the peace of the living, the peace of the truly free. Thank you all for listening to our story tonight around the Wild West Campfire. I'd love to hear where you're listening from, whether it's on a long drive across the plains, cozied up at home, or maybe even out under the stars like our ancestors did. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts about Eleanor and Luke's journey. Did their love story touch your heart? Let us know in the comments below.